have a session today with Dr. Jinane, a dermatologist. The session will be about summer and sun safety. And Dr. Jinane.
Well, thank you very much to Mumz for having me to give the session. So I'm a dermatologist. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the Lebanese American University in Beirut. I'm also a program director, so I'm used to, giving lectures to residents, to students of medicine. So I will be going a little bit into the science of why sun safety is important, okay? But I know that if you feel at any point that there's something that you don't understand, we're a small group, you can feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions. So that's to start with. So just a story, when I was a student, when we were in school, when I was first years of university, we used to love going, summer would be equal to sitting in the sun all day long and, going for exams, then the next day, going into the sun. And I used to have a beautiful tan. And then I started my dermatology residency, and we started learning about how sun affects the skin. And so ever since, you won't see me with a tan very, very often. And I'll explain to you why. So first, I'm a doctor, and second, I do have a page on Instagram where I create my own little illustrations just to explain science in a very simple way to the public. So most of the you're going to see a lot of illustrations in this talk, and it's going to be these are my own illustrations. They are a little bit childish, but they're still scientific. That's why I wanted to talk. So there are two main parts to the talk. One, so what are the risks that come with excessive sun exposure, and why are we, as dermatologists, always telling you stay out of the sun, stay out of the sun? And two, how do we protect ourselves from the sun? So starting with the first questions, what are the risks that come from sun exposure? So I don't know if you know, but as human beings, we've been worshiping the sun for centuries, okay? So this is Helios, the god of the sun. And we also have Heliopolis in Lebanon, so Baalbek, that was, built to worship, to worship the sun. And our modern day sun worshippers are people who spend their days from the morning to the evening sun tanning. And so why are we as dermatologists always telling you, why are we always picking on the sun? What is so bad with sitting in the sun? There are some advantages, mostly on the mood, vitamin D production, but we'll talk about that. So vitamin D production, it's enough to stay for 15, 20 minutes in the sun with your arms uncovered to get vitamin D from the sun. You don't have to spend the whole day, okay? And really, it comes from the fact that sun causes damage to the skin, okay? And not any damage. We're gonna look at what kind of damage comes from sun exposure. So when I talk about sunlight is a bunch of radiation that comes from the star, which is the sun, and gets to us on the earth, on the surface of the earth, okay? And it's a range. I don't have the whole range here on this illustration, okay? I'll show you another graph to show you all of the range, but mostly what we really feel are visible light, which is the light that allows us to see colors, which is the light that allows us to look around us, okay? You have the part that's called UV, okay? When somebody asks us, what is UV? So the part that is called UV is the part that's under, so shorter wavelengths, okay, than visible light. And you have the part that's called infrared, which is what you feel as heat on the skin, okay? So basically, sorry, why? So just to show you again, you have wavelengths that are below the ultraviolet, below and above the infrared. These are, so X-rays and gamma rays do not enter our atmosphere, okay? Even I can tell you that UVC and vacuum UV do not enter our atmosphere. They are blocked by the ozone layer. So what we get from the sun really are UVB and UVA. And why, will you tell me, is it so bad for us to get UVB and UVA? It has to do with the energy they carry and the damage that they can do, okay? UVA and UVB have a higher energy, okay, than visible light, and they can cause damage to your DNA, okay? Thankfully, UVC doesn't enter the atmosphere, Okay, because if you want to kill bacteria on for example, on the surface of a certain, let's say, product, you can use UVC to kill bacteria. So UVC kills life, basically. So we're happy that UVC doesn't get to our through the atmosphere. We only get UVB, part of UVB, because it's blocked by the ozone layer, and all of UVA that is not blocked by the ozone layer. Okay. So what about windows? What do they transmit? Thankfully, windows will block UVB. Okay. However, they do not block UVA, and this is an important aspect, because when we when they ask you, why do we need to wear sunscreen indoors? Because even though you are not sitting in direct sunlight, you still get some UVA, okay? So sometimes when you're reading, in the newspaper about the weather, some newspapers will tell you what the UV index is. And the UV index was developed by the National Weather Services and the US Environmental Protection Agency to tell us, on an average day, on this day today, how much UV are you getting? Because you don't get UV as much in January than you get in, let's say, in November, or you say in July and August. There's a difference. In the summer, you get more UV than in the winter, okay? So when it's 0 to 2, usually there is no danger to the average person. When it's 3 to 5, you have little risk. 6 to 7, you have high risk of harm from unprotected sun exposure. 8 to 9, you have very high risk of harm from unprotected sun exposure. And 11 plus, you have extreme risk of harm from unprotected sun exposure. Okay. I took a look at what is the average UV index, in Beirut, for example, throughout the year. And as I told you, in January, February, March, it's usually, not that dangerous to sit in the sun because the UV index is low. But from April to September, you start going into the red, okay? And the red and the purple, which is high or very high risk, okay, of sun damage from sitting in direct sunlight, okay? So that's an important thing to say. I looked at the UV index in Dubai, since some of you are joining us from Dubai. This is what I got, and this is from the National Center for Meteorology. I thought it was a little bit weird that in June and July their UV index is not as high as in Lebanon during these months. But you can see already, okay, that in January and December, so even in the winter month in Dubai, you get a lot of UV. So it's important to get a year-round protection from sun. So what happens?
But how come it's not that high? Is there any reason?
I have a question mark on the numbers. Because it's very, very unusual that our UV index in July is 12, okay, or 11, okay. In July is 12, which is the maximum, and in Dubai it's not more than that. I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. I checked, but this graph here makes sense to me, okay, whereas this doesn't. But we're in the orange and red all year long, okay, in Dubai. What happens when you get exposed to sunlight, okay? So this is a graph of the skin. I'm not going to go into the details, okay? But just to show you, I'm going to get you to a simplified, version of what the skin looks like. So the skin has 3 layers. It has the superficial layer, which is called the epidermis. Okay? It has a deeper layer, which is called the dermis, and the deepest layer is called the subcutis, which is the fat layer, okay? In the dermis, you get all of the collagen, the elastin, all of which gives you consistency to the skin. The epidermis is the outermost layer, okay? It's the outermost layer that protects the skin against, it's the outermost barrier. It protects us against, chemicals, against sun, against any threat that comes to the skin. The outermost layer is responsible mostly for the protection. Okay. So from what I told you before about the light that comes to us from the sun, you have the UVA, the UVB, okay? You should know that the UVB does not enter into the dermis, okay? So UVB does not damage collagen, Okay, so UVB is not the primary ray that causes wrinkles. Okay, UVB only affects the superficial part, which is basically the epidermis. In the epidermis, you have cells that give you color. You have cells that give you consistency, and so keratinocytes and melanocytes. Okay, and that gives you sort of basically the protection of the skin. And the dermis, so UVB enters into the dermis, which is where all the collagen and all the elasticity of the skin comes from. I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. So UVA is mostly responsible for skin aging, whereas UVB is mostly responsible for skin cancer, sunburn, okay, and pigmentation, okay? So, very simplified. I zoomed in on the very superficial part, which is the epidermis. And these are cells that are called, so this is a very simplified. These are cells that we're going to call keratinocytes, which are the primary. 90% of the epidermis are formed by keratinocytes. What happens when UV comes there? UV comes and hits the epidermis. What happens with these cells is that they get DNA damage. Okay? Why is DNA damage important? So DNA in itself is the program, okay, that allows our cells to be who they are, okay? It allows us to be who we are, basically, and it allows these cells to reproduce, basically, to divide up in an equitable and normal way. When DNA damage happens, and if DNA damage is bad enough, okay, cells, to protect themselves, are going to commit suicide. So they are going to become sunburn cells. And this is the big difference between when you get a sunburn and when you get a burn from, let's say, hot water, okay? When you get a burn from hot water, these cells are going to die because physically they were burnt. When you get a burn from the sun, you're not going to have these cells die because they were physically burnt with heat, okay? They're going to die because the program went wrong. So there was a system error. So there was a problem, and the program that went wrong, there were mutations in the DNA, okay? And they committed suicide. They decided that they can't live on, they can't keep on going, because if they keep on going, they are going to transform into cancer. Is it clear? I try to simplify it, but this is an important concept, okay? And so what happens? How does the body defend itself? The first thing is that you get the sunburn. The second thing is you have cells in the epidermis which are going to produce color, okay? And this color is going to block UV. And this is why tanning, even regular tanning, okay, tanning is a response to excess UV, okay? And it's a response to DNA damage. So there is no such thing as a safe tan. If you're tanned, it means that you got enough UV on your skin to cause DNA damage, okay? And your body defended itself by making color and tanning, okay? So this is the first point I want to make, okay? Sunburns, we talked about, so this is the first risk of excessive sun exposure, and it's sunburns. And you should know that sunburns predispose you, especially during childhood, to an excessive risk of skin cancer, specifically melanoma, okay? And of course, you have several other types of skin cancer, like squamous cell carcinoma and basal cell carcinoma. These are types of skin cancers that you get, that I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, okay? So this is just to tell you that this is basically, I went back and told you a little bit what I just already. This is an amazing picture of I think he's 68 years old. And this is a truck driver, okay, who was driving his truck for 30 years. And as you know, the sun comes from the left side, okay? And so you can see clearly, okay, that this truck driver for 30 years has been exposed on this side to sun much, much more than this side. So this is the effect of UVA. You're going to see wrinkling, deep wrinkles, a deep change in the texture of the skin, okay? So this is the main, this is the main effect of UVA. And this image shows you beautifully what is the effect of the sun on your skin and on skin aging. But you can do this yourself on your own body. You can take a look at the difference between your sun-exposed skin and non-sun exposed skin, and you will see a difference in pigmentation, in elasticity, and all of these. Maybe not at an early age, but maybe within the 50s, 60s, you will see a difference. Okay. Finally, I talked about skin cancer very quickly, but skin cancer is one of the main, that's mainly why we tell you, please do not sit in the sun. Do not get sunburned, do not get excessive sun exposure, and please do not go into sun tanning, basically indoor tanning, which is, we call them solarium in Lebanon, okay? All of these will increase your risk of skin cancer. The one that you're looking at is the nastiest one, basically melanoma, okay? And we recognize it because of the ABCDEs. So A would be asymmetry. This is not a symmetrical lesion. So this side is very different from this side. Can you see my arrow, or should I use a pointer? So this side is different from this side. B, borders, you can't really tell, basically here, we can't really tell where the borders are, okay? They're kind of melting into the skin. C for color, okay, so we have several colors in one lesion. D for diameter, this is basically a lesion that grew, okay? And E for evolution, also it grew. So this is, it has all of what we see in melanoma. And melanoma is a killer, okay? It's very important to take it out early on, because the risks, the survival increases drastically. But if you let a melanoma grow, okay, this is one of the most deadliest skin cancers that you can get. Now, the others, squamous cell carcinoma and basal cell carcinoma, are skin cancers that we see a lot more than this type of skin cancer. And they are related, of course, to sun exposure as well. And usually they are very treatable. If you catch them early on, you remove them, there's no problem. You just need to follow up very, very often. Other effects of sun exposure, it can actually suppress your immune system. This is why a lot of people who spend a lot of time in the sun, the next day or after 2-3 days, they get sick, okay? Because you have a suppression of the immune system by UV. Okay, and it's not only a suppression on the surface of the skin, it's a deep suppression of the immune system. Okay, and also it can affect the eyes. I'm not going to talk about this, but if you want to get an ophthalmologist to talk to you about the effect of sun on the eyes, it can cause cataract. It can even get sunburns, basically, of the eyes. So this is why it's important to wear sunglasses. Okay. So I hope I convinced you that sitting in the sun is not great, okay, and tanning is not great. Now the second question, which is basically, how do I protect myself from this? The first thing is, if you can not sit in the sun in peak hours, okay, in Lebanon it will be 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., okay. In Dubai, I think it starts a little bit earlier, okay. So one, it's to seek shade, okay? Two, wear protective clothing. And when I talk about protective clothing, it's not white linen, okay? White linen will allow UV to get underneath it. It's approximately equivalent to an SPF of 8, not more than that, okay? And we'll talk about SPF. So it needs to be really tightly knit clothes, okay, and long sleeved, okay. Also very important to protect the head, especially in people who do not have, very thick hair, okay. So a wide-brimmed hat, okay. Sunglasses, we talked about that to protect the eyes and the skin around the eyes, okay. Sunscreen, we'll talk very extensively about sunscreens, and gradual sun exposure. So you don't go and spend the whole day, okay, from the first time you go to the beach under the sun. This is, common sense, you're gonna get burnt, okay. So, sunscreen basics. If you look at this sunscreen here, you're going to read several things. One, there's something called, there's an appellation here of SPF. A lot of people don't know what SPF means, and we're going to go into what SPF means, okay, and what is an SPF that's acceptable and enough, okay. Two, you're going to read something called broad spectrum, or UVA, UVB, and we'll go into what this means, okay. Three, you're going to read water resistant, okay, and then we're going to look at the active ingredients and the difference between a physical and a chemical substance. Okay? And then we're going to talk about what sunscreen is better for who. Okay, so this is the next. So what does SPF stand for? SPF stands for sun protective factor, which is basically how well a sunscreen will protect you from specifically UVB, not UVB, UVA, specifically UVB. Okay, and the way they assess this is they take 10 people with white skin, okay, and they put a specific amount, okay, which is 2 milligrams per centimeter square, which is equivalent to 30 milliliters of sunscreen to cover the entire body, okay, and they basically measure. They put UV on the skin. They measure how quickly how much of the dose that the sun exposed, the UV exposed skin that is protected can take versus the non-protected, okay? You should know that most people do under-apply their sunscreen drastically, okay? And that means that if you've applied an SPF of 20, okay, if you underutilized it, okay, you're not getting an SPF of 20, you're getting an SPF of like 8 or 7, okay? So this is just, I was telling you about how they determine the sun protection factor, okay? So a quick numbers thing. SPF 15 will block 93% of UVB rays, okay, by calculations. SPF 30 will block 97% of UVB rays. SPF 50 blocks 98% of UVB rays. You're going to tell me what's the difference between 93% and 98%? First of all, so as I said before, okay, it's important for you to know that most people do not apply as much sunscreen as they should, okay, which is 2 fingers for the face, okay, and a shot basically for the whole body, okay. So if you're not applying enough, SPF 50 will turn into SPF 20. SPF 30 will turn into SPF 10. SPF 15 will turn into an SPF of 3 or 4. Okay, so that's why we go for a higher SPF. Okay, and that's why we prefer a higher SPF. Okay, so the second thing that we read is broad spectrum or UVA. This means that this sunscreen will protect you not only against UVB, but also against UVA. And we learned in the first part of this talk why protecting you against UVA is important. It's good. You should know there's something I didn't really delve into, is that UVA is also responsible for skin cancer. We always, we talk about UVA as being the primary responsible for skin aging, but we do have studies showing that UVA also is responsible for skin cancer as well. But Khoury, I wanted to simplify things a little bit. I'm saying this because the solariums use UVA. Okay, and that's why they market it as UVA being solariums being a safer option for sun tanning. This is not true, because there are a lot of studies now that show that tanning in a solarium increases your risk of skin cancers. And in the UK, they are moving towards banning solariums. Okay, so this is why this marketing strategy that they use to tell you that solariums are a safe tan, they're not. Okay, and so this is something I wanted to stress. Okay, so we talked about UVA protection, we talked about UVB protection, and then you're going to read something like water resistant. What does it mean to be water resistant? So basically, it means that they put somebody's skin and with the sunscreen, and they put it in a whirlpool for 40 minutes or 80 minutes, okay, depending, and it retained its ability to protect the skin. This is very important for you to have it as water resistant or water as water resistant, okay? But anyway, reapply every 2 hours, okay? Now, about the mechanism of action. What's the difference, and we get this question a lot, what's the difference between a physical sunscreen and a chemical sunscreen? Okay. A physical sunscreen is going to act like a mirror, okay? It's a product that you put on the skin, and when the UV rays come and hit the surface of the skin, it's simply going to reflect it back, okay? It's usually an inert product. It's not a product that's going to change when the UV comes and hits it. It's not going to transform into something else. It's just going to act as a mirror. Okay? It's important, so it helps us with blocking UV rays. It also helps us with UVA. It also helps us with visible rays and infrared rays. So usually a mineral sunscreen, we use it to block everything. Okay, it's very efficacious. However, it doesn't look very pretty. Okay, when you see people with their white faces, okay, they usually will have put a physical sunscreen on. Okay, and the nice thing about physical sunscreens is that usually they don't cause allergies. So this is why we use them for children below the age of 2 years and adults with very sensitive skin. You should also know that there are new generations of physical sunscreen with what we call micronized titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. Physically, they look better. So, for example, I'm wearing a physical sunscreen, it doesn't show, okay? But it doesn't reflect UV rays as perfectly as the actual traditional physical sunscreens. What about chemical sunscreens? So chemical sunscreens are chemicals, okay, usually that are going to go on the skin 30 minutes beforehand, okay, and when UV comes and hits the skin, they're going to transform into another chemical. So they're going to absorb the energy of the UV, transform, okay, and then release this energy back as heat, okay. So there is a chemical reaction that's going on the surface of the skin. So a lot of these are photolabile, meaning that when the sun comes and hits the skin, they're going to disappear. So they're not effective anymore after they did their job, okay? Which is why reapplication is important, okay? 2, sometimes when these sunscreens are put on the skin, okay, and the sun hits them, okay, they can transform into chemicals that are going to give you an allergy. This is why usually we like to avoid these in people who have very sensitive skin. And we also like to avoid them in children below the age of 2 because of the risk of oxidation. Okay, so and they usually are combined with what we call photostabilizers. So there are more chemicals to stabilize these chemicals. So what do you do for children? You should know that below the age of 6 months, it's better not to get them into the sun. Okay. Because one, there are several reasons why. Because one, as babies, they can lose heat very quickly, or they can heat up very quickly, and they can get dehydrated very quickly. So this is the basic why we don't want them in the sun. 2, we don't want them to burn at this age. It's very bad if they burn at this age, okay? 3, so actually these are the 2 reasons why we don't want them in the sun. So if you want to protect these children from the sun, take them out of the sun, okay? Put them in the shade. 2, I will privilege, the protective clothing in this age group, okay? So long sleeved. If they're wearing, bathing suits, you do have, protective bathing suits that are like t-shirts, okay? You do have also the hats that are like very thick. They actually have an appellation called UPF on them, UPF 50. So it's UV protective factor, okay? And they usually have like, these things that come to cover over the ears, because we always forget the ears. The ears can get burned. The nape of the neck here can get burned, okay? So all of these are sensitive places. So in this age group, please go for protective clothing. Now, if you can't, or if you forgot to put long sleeves, and if you're in a situation, you have to go for the least possible amount of skin, okay? And please go for a mineral sunscreen. Why? Because we worry about absorption, okay, in this age group, okay? And this is and also, sunglasses. Okay, 2, for children older than the age of 6 months, same thing. I want them to have clothing on, okay? So protective clothing. If they're wearing a bathing suit, I would go for a one piece, except in girls. For boys, maybe wearing, the long sleeved, t-shirt. I'm sorry, this is a little bit, I know it's not cool. I know that probably the children won't be happy doing that. but I'm talking to you as, you know, as a dermatologist here, and I know very well the struggle that you can have with a toddler or with an 8-year-old. So, but this is textbook what we should be doing. Okay, avoid exposure, as we said before, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Okay, if you are exposed, we go for an SPF 30 and above. For children between the age of 6 months and 2 years, let's go for a mineral sunscreen. Above the age of 2 years, you can use a chemical sunscreen for children. Okay, so a lot of brands have chemical sunscreens so regular, you know, you're going to see sunscreen for children. You can use that in children above the age of. It should have a UVA coverage, and you should absolutely reapply every 2 hours. Okay, so this is for children. Now for pregnancy, for the same reason, we prefer a mineral sunscreen. Yeah.
Just before switching to the pregnancy, someone asked for children in the chat if you want to answer now or if you want to keep it.
I'm almost done with the presentation, so if you want, we can keep it till the end.
Okay, perfect.
Where's it? Can you? My son is 9 years old. I apply ample sunscreen on him before school, but due to the heat, he probably sweats it off in the first 2 hours. Plus, being that age, he never remembers to reapply. How do I ensure that your man's protected? You have to. It's the clothing, unfortunately. You have to teach him to reapply the sunscreen, and you have to make sure that you have to protect him with clothing at that point. You know, I know it's complicated.
When should we reapply? After how?
After 2 hours.
After 2 hours.
After 2 hours, you reapply. Okay, if you're in direct sunlight. Okay, and if you're going into the water, okay, you reapply after you go out, even if it's written waterproof. You know, if it's written waterproof, amazing, but just reapply. Okay, for pregnant women, we prefer to go for. For pregnant women, we also prefer to go for mineral sunscreens. Okay, so you know that during pregnancy, we really ask pregnant women to apply, you know, sunscreen mostly on the face, but also on the whole body. It's important. If this is to prevent skin damage from UV radiation. They can have pigmentary disorders, especially melasma. Okay, and sunscreens have been proven safe by toxicology tests, including for teratogenic tests, meaning that they don't have an effect on the baby. Okay. However, studies regarding safety of nanoparticulate inorganic ingredients during pregnancy are not available, meaning micronized sunscreens. Basically, go for a mineral sunscreen if you're pregnant. Okay, it's the safest. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you guys, what's the safest way to tan? Is there a safe way to tan? I think I answered that at first. There is no safest way to tan. Tanning equal DNA damage. Now, if you want to tan, okay, if you want a color, okay, the absolutely safest way to tan is sun booths, okay, basically spray tans, okay. There is no increase in this risk of skin cancer. However, the tan that you get here is not protective against sunlight. Okay. Now, if you're gonna ask me, so this was my last slide. If you're gonna
based on Ross, it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah, but exactly. So there are creams, and learn to count to 5. Okay. So the other question is that if I want to tan, okay, if khalas, I understand that there is DMA damage. I understand that there's an increased risk of skin cancer. I understand that there's an increased risk of basically skin age. I understand all of that, doctor. I still want to tan. How do you tan? A gradual exposure. Okay, so you go for 15 minutes the first day before 10 a.m. after 4 p.m. Then the next day you increase to 30 minutes, you increase to 45 minutes thereafter. Once you've built a small tan, a real tan, okay, this will protect you against sunburn. Okay, so melanin in your skin is meant to protect you against it. There is one thing that I failed to mention in this presentation, and I didn't put slides for, but I will tell you orally. You should know that not all skin types have the same risk when it comes to sun damage. A white person with red hair, which is what we define as a Fitzpatrick type 1, okay, is going to have a way bigger risk of skin cancer than somebody with dark hair and dark skin, because the type 1, just to simplify it, doesn't have enough melanin in their skin, okay? Doesn't tan, they burn, okay? Their skin doesn't produce enough melanin, and it doesn't produce a good enough type of melanin to protect them against UV, okay? So these people, I strongly, tell them, please do not sit in the sun, okay? Especially if they already have a lot of freckles, especially if they have a family history of skin cancer, and especially if they've already had, a history of sunburn during childhood. Now, if you tell me a skin type 6, a skin type 4, 5, 6, the darker individuals, okay, I would tell them, you want to tan, you do a gradual sun exposure. I will still ask you to put sunscreen on, okay, to protect yourself from pigmentation, from aging, all of these. So this is an important thing. Now,
just a question: if you already have a dark skin, like
you can still get melasma. You can still get skin cancer. Usually less, okay, but melasma, a lot of darker individuals are going to get melasma. So,
okay,
and the pigmentation of the face.
Yeah, the pigmentation.
The pigmentation is an issue. Here in this presentation,
it's not even protected with sunscreen.
No, when you protect with sunscreen, you decrease a lot the possibility of pigmentation, of course.
And for the face, like SPF 15 is enough?
SPF 15 protects you about 97%. It blocks about 97% of UV rays. So the SPF 15 on a regular day, okay, where you're not going to get sun exposed, when you're in your office and you're not sitting next to a giant window, okay, and usually and if it's broad spectrum, then this should be fine. Okay, but if you're going
to the beach and
if you're going to the beach, you take an SPF 30 and above.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is there anybody in the chat? What are your thoughts on SPF 50 on the sunscreen titles? So one, I think I do see these. Okay, I do see these. And yeah, SPF 100. Sorry, SPF 100. Sorry, I read it wrong. So in some places, it's forbidden to say SPF 100. Okay, specifically in the US, you cannot say that this is a sunscreen with SPF 100. Okay, the highest you can say is SPF 50 plus. Okay, now it does. Sometimes we do use SPF 100s, and people, for the same reason as we use SPF 50, because people are not going to apply as much. Okay, they do have a higher protection, but it's going to be like a 0.5% or 1% more than an SPF 50. Okay, because SPF 50 already protects you from or if I'm not mistaken, 99% of the UVB. Okay, so the difference between SPF 50 and SPF 100 is not huge. It becomes huge it becomes big if you use a very small amount of the sunscreen, if you don't use enough. Okay, so if you're in a country where you can find SPF 50, then I don't have a problem with you going for that.
Okay, so just to summarize, so when we are looking, when we're looking for a sunscreen, there are so many brands, there's so many options that we have. How can we identify the best one, or maybe what to look at in specific? I know you mentioned
okay.
Yes, so it would be good just for us so we can know, because we can see organic, non-organic, mineral, non-mineral. So
yeah, one is, who are you buying the sunscreen for? If we're buying for children, how old are they? If they're below the age of 6 months, you're not buying them sunscreen. you're putting them out of the sun. And if they need to use sunscreen, you could use a mineral sunscreen. If they're between the age of 6 months and 2 years, you go for a mineral sunscreen and protective clothing. If between the age of 6 months and 2 years and above, as a child, you can go for a sunscreen, a lotion, okay, that is SPF 30 and above, water resistant, broad-based. If you can find this in a mineral sunscreen, it's always great, okay, but usually mineral sunscreens are very small, okay, and they will leave a trace, so sometimes children will give you trouble. So you can go for an organic, a chemical sunscreen, okay, that is SPF 30, broad-based, broad spectrum, and water resistant. Now, if you're talking about a teenager with acne, okay, and you want to use a sunscreen that's for the face, you're gonna go for a sunscreen that is made for acne-proof skin, okay? So it's gonna be written on it oil-free or non-comedogenic, okay? And you're still going to go for an SPF of 30 and above, broad spectrum, water resistant, okay? These are the basics of safety practices, okay? If you are a pregnant woman, okay, you go for a mineral sunscreen. If you have normal skin, you're an adult, okay, normal skin, normal to oily, okay, always try to go for a sunscreen that is fluid, okay. If you are an adult with a normal skin but you have pigmentation issues, okay, you have melasma, okay, it's better to also block visible light, so you should try to go for a tinted sunscreen, okay. If you are an adult with allergies, with sun allergies, you need to go for a mineral sunscreen. So the question of who am I prescribing this sunscreen for is very important. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. This is very clear. Thanks. You mentioned the tinted sunscreen. So what's the difference between tinted and non-tinted?
So tinted has a color, and color absorbs visible light. Okay. So this is the difference between tinted and non-tinted. Apart from the cosmetic part, which is basically that you're putting a color on your face. So you're camouflaging whatever problem that you have, which is something that a lot of people like. They put a tinted sunscreen instead of putting, a fluid foundation. Okay? I think it works beautifully. It has a beautiful, I'm the type of person, I don't have time in the morning. I just put one thing and I start my crazy day. Yeah, I start my crazy day. So this is very practical. Okay. So why is it important to block visible light? Because visible light has been, melasma is a complicated subject. It's not only about UVs. It's also about hormones, about genetic predisposition, about heat, and about visible sunlight. Okay, so this is where it's important to block visible sunlight and use a tinted sunscreen.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? Anyone? Nothing in the chat. Okay.
So, d'accord. I just wanted to thank you, just to remind you about safety first. Okay, I'm sorry I depressed the hell out of you before summer. So but never ask, a dermatologist to talk to you about sun just before summer. You're gonna spend your summer indoors. But this is just, basic safety. This is part of our job,
Well, I think it's important for us to know for our kids as well. Maybe it's too late for us now.
Absolutely.
But to protect our kids, and we all know the bad damage, but we still go for tanning.
I understand it. I don't particularly like being very white, but when I get into my clinic, a 70-year-old or even a 50-year-old or even a 45-year-old with skin cancer, they spend their whole time, without sun protection. It's too bad. That's something that is preventable, that you can prevent this. And this is why we talk about sun safety.
Wow. Okay. If you put it this way.
That's exactly how I put it. We do, anti-aging sells better,
Yeah.
Anti-aging sells better. People want to know about this, but they don't like hearing about, the other part of medicine. And this is why we do these talks. Okay. So thank you very much. I just want to remind you that you can find me on the page, Not Another Dermatologist, and I love Snoopy. So
I just wanted to tell everyone that you have such an interesting page, and the images that you draw, and I think you draw them yourself, right? Yeah. So you're not only a dermatologist, you're an artist. And your content is really interesting. Thank you so much, and of course you can always reach out to Jinane on our academy, and you can ask her questions, and you can find her there. Thank you so much again.
You're most welcome. Have a lovely day.
Have a great day. Thanks.